There are moments in life when a single act of kindness, a sacrifice made out of pure love, gets trampled on by those we least expect. Today we bring you a story that will make you question the limits of family tolerance and the price of setting boundaries. This is the story of a mother who gave up her dream vacation to buy a $249 electric air fryer for her son, only to watch it be deliberately destroyed by her brother's children, who laughed in her face as if it were all just a joke. But this is not just about a broken appliance. This is about respect, dignity, and the courage to stand up for yourself when everyone around you expects you to stay silent. What happened next changed this family forever, and the question that remains is, how far does forgiveness go when it comes to family? Stay with us until the end, because this story has twists you won't see coming. Sarah Mitchell had been working as a nurse at County General Hospital for over 15 years. The shifts were long, the work exhausting, and the pay, while decent, never seemed quite enough to cover all of life's expenses and still leave room for dreams. But Sarah had one dream she held onto through all those difficult years, a vacation to the coast. She had never seen the ocean. Growing up in a landlocked town in the Midwest, surrounded by endless cornfields and small-town simplicity, the idea of standing on a beach, feeling sand between her toes, and watching the waves crash against the shore felt like the ultimate luxury. For 3 years, Sarah had been saving. $20 here, $50 there. Every time she worked a double shift, every time she skipped buying herself new clothes or treated herself to dinner out, that money went into a small envelope she kept hidden in her bedroom drawer. By the spring of that year, she had finally saved enough, $1,200, enough for a week-long trip to the Florida coast, including a modest hotel room, meals, and maybe even a souvenir or two. Sarah lived with her 17-year-old son Michael in a 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. Michael's father had left when the boy was just 5 years old, and since then, it had been just the two of them against the world. Sarah had raised Michael to be respectful, hard-working, and grateful for what they had, even when what they had wasn't much. Michael had recently developed an interest in cooking. He would watch cooking shows after finishing his homework, and he talked constantly about eating healthier, about learning to prepare meals that weren't just frozen dinners heated in the microwave. One evening in late May, Michael came home from school and mentioned, almost casually, that his friend's family had just bought an air fryer. He described it with such enthusiasm, talking about how you could make crispy food without all the oil, how it was healthier, and how he could finally experiment with recipes he had been watching online. Sarah listened to her son with a mixture of pride and heartache. She saw the light in his eyes, the genuine excitement, and she thought about her envelope of savings. That night, after Michael went to bed, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in front of her. She took out the envelope and counted the money again. Then she opened her laptop and searched for air fryers. The good ones, the ones with enough capacity to cook for 2 people and multiple functions, cost around $250. She looked at photos of beaches, at the hotel reservation she had bookmarked. She imagined the sound of the ocean, the feeling of sun on her skin. And then she looked down the hallway at Michael's closed bedroom door. The decision took her most of the night. By dawn, she had made up her mind. 2 days later, Sarah walked into an appliance store and bought a top-of-the-line electric air fryer for $249. When she brought it home and placed it on the kitchen counter with a ribbon tied around it, Michael's reaction made everything worth it. He hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe, thanking her over and over, promising he would cook for both of them every night. Sarah smiled and told him she was happy to do it, that seeing him happy was all the vacation she needed. But late that night, alone in her room, she allowed herself a moment to grieve the ocean she would not see, the sand she would not feel, the dream she had postponed once again. What Sarah didn't know then was that her sacrifice, made with such love and hope, would soon become the center of a family crisis that would force her to make choices she never imagined she would have to make. 3 weeks after Sarah gave Michael the air fryer, her older brother David called to invite them to a family dinner. David lived in a larger house on the other side of town with his wife Jennifer and their 2 children, Tyler, who was 12, and Emma, who was 10. David worked in sales and made considerably more money than Sarah. His house had 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, and a backyard with a pool. Jennifer didn't work outside the home, preferring to focus on the children and her various social activities. Sarah had always had a complicated relationship with her brother. Growing up, David had been the golden child, the one who went to college, who made their parents proud with his career success and his picture-perfect family. Sarah, on the other hand, had gotten pregnant young, dropped out of her nursing program temporarily, and struggled for years as a single mother before finally completing her degree. David had helped her financially a few times over the years, but there was always an unspoken understanding that he was the successful one and she was the one who needed help. It created a dynamic that Sarah found uncomfortable, but she accepted it because family was family. The invitation came on a Friday evening. David insisted they come over on Saturday for a barbecue. He mentioned that Jennifer was making her famous potato salad and that the kids were excited to see their cousin Michael. Sarah hesitated. She was exhausted from working 4 12-hour shifts that week, and she knew that gatherings at David's house often left her feeling inadequate and judged. But Michael overheard the conversation and seemed genuinely excited about seeing his cousins, so Sarah agreed. Saturday afternoon, Sarah and Michael drove across town to David's house. Michael insisted on bringing the air fryer to show his uncle and cousins. He had been using it every day, making everything from chicken wings to roasted vegetables, and he was proud of how well he had learned to use it. Sarah felt a twinge of anxiety about bringing such an expensive item to her brother's house, but Michael's enthusiasm won her over. When they arrived, Jennifer greeted them at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had always been polite to Sarah, but there was a coolness there, a subtle condescension in the way she spoke. As they walked into the house, Tyler and Emma ran up to Michael, shouting and pulling at his arms. The children were notoriously poorly behaved. Sarah had witnessed tantrums in restaurants, disrespectful talking back to their parents, and a general sense of entitlement that made her uncomfortable. But whenever she had gently mentioned anything to David, he would laugh it off, saying kids would be kids. Michael proudly showed his cousins the air fryer, explaining how it worked and what he had been cooking with it. Tyler immediately grabbed at it, wanting to hold it, while Emma demanded to know how much it cost. When Michael mentioned the price, Jennifer, who was standing nearby, arranging chips and dip on the counter, let out a small laugh and said, $250 for something that just blows hot air. Well, I suppose everyone has their own priorities. The comment stung, but Sarah bit her tongue, reminding herself that she was a guest in her brother's home. The afternoon progressed with the usual family dynamics. David grilled burgers and hot dogs while talking loudly about his latest sales success. Jennifer held court on the patio, discussing her plans to renovate the kitchen. Tyler and Emma ran wild, jumping in the pool with their clothes on, tracking water through the house and demanding constant attention. Sarah sat quietly, feeling out of place, while Michael helped his uncle with the grill and chatted about school. As evening approached, Jennifer suggested they all have dessert inside while the kids played. Sarah felt that familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Something about the way Jennifer kept glancing at the air fryer, still sitting on the kitchen counter where Michael had left it, made her uneasy, but she pushed the feeling aside, telling herself she was being paranoid. What Sarah didn't know was that her instincts were right. The worst was yet to come, and it would happen in the span of just a few devastating minutes. After dessert, the adults moved to the living room while Michael went outside to help his uncle store the grill equipment. Tyler and Emma, seemingly bored with the adult conversation, asked if they could play in the kitchen. Jennifer waved them off with barely a glance, more interested in showing Sarah photos on her phone of their recent vacation to a resort in Mexico. Sarah looked at the photos of pristine beaches and luxury accommodations, feeling that familiar ache in her chest for the vacation she had given up. About 15 minutes passed. Sarah excused herself to use the bathroom. As she walked down the hallway, she heard strange noises coming from the kitchen. There was a mechanical whirring sound, followed by giggling, and what sounded like something being crunched. Her heart started to race. She quickened her pace and turned the corner into the kitchen. What she saw made her blood run cold. Tyler and Emma were standing at the counter with the air fryer plugged in and running. They had opened a large family-size bag of potato chips and were shoving handfuls of chips into the air fryer basket, cramming them in as tightly as they could. The machine was making a horrible grinding noise, clearly not designed to handle whole chips shoved into its mechanism. Crumbs and broken chips were scattered all over the counter and floor. The children were laughing hysterically, treating the entire thing like a game, like a science experiment, to see how much they could stuff into the machine before something happened. Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. "What are you doing?" Tyler and Emma spun around, and instead of looking guilty or apologetic, they burst into even louder laughter. Tyler, the older one, smirked and said, "We're making super crispy chips. This thing is so stupid it can't even handle regular chips." Emma joined in. "Yeah, and Michael thinks he's so cool with his fancy fryer." Then Tyler reached over and pressed more buttons, and the machine made a terrible screeching sound before smoke started to pour out of the vents. Sarah lunged forward and unplugged the machine, her hands shaking. She opened the basket to find it completely jammed with crushed chips, the heating element visible underneath, coated in a thick layer of grease and chip debris. The smell of burning plastic filled the air. The air fryer was destroyed, completely, irreparably destroyed. The noise had attracted attention, and Jennifer walked into the kitchen, followed by David and Michael. Michael's face went pale when he saw his air fryer, smoke still wisping from it, and the mess of chips everywhere. Jennifer looked at the scene, and instead of scolding her children, she let out an exasperated sigh and said, "Tyler, Emma, you know you're not supposed to play with other people's things." But her tone was light, almost amused, as if they had merely moved a vase without permission. Sarah felt something break inside her. "They destroyed it," she said, her voice shaking. "They deliberately destroyed it." Jennifer shrugged. "They're just kids, Sarah. They didn't know it would break. It's just an appliance." Those words, spoken so casually, so dismissively, ignited something in Sarah that had been building for years. Before she could respond, Tyler looked right at Sarah and laughed again, the same cruel, mocking laugh, and said, "It's not even that big of a deal. Just buy another one." Emma, emboldened by her brother and her mother's lack of consequences, added, "Yeah, it's just a stupid fryer." And then they both laughed again, right in Sarah's face, as if her pain and shock were the funniest things in the world. Michael stood frozen, staring at the ruined appliance his mother had sacrificed so much to give him. David shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, and Jennifer, crossing her arms, actually smiled and said, "Really, Sarah, you don't need to be so dramatic. Accidents happen. I'm sure David can lend you some money if you need to replace it." That was the moment. That was the exact moment when Sarah decided that enough was enough. The kitchen fell silent except for the faint smell of burned plastic still hanging in the air. Sarah looked at her brother, at his wife, at their children who stood there with smug expressions, and something inside her that had been compressed for years finally exploded. Her voice, when it came, was steady and cold, colder than anyone in that room had ever heard from her. "Do you want to know how I paid for that air fryer?" Sarah asked. She didn't wait for an answer. "For 3 years, I saved every spare dollar I could find. I worked double shifts until my feet bled. I skipped meals. I wore the same worn-out shoes for 2 years because every $20 mattered. I had $1,200 saved. Do you know what that was for? That was for my first real vacation in 17 years. I was going to see the ocean for the first time in my entire life. Michael turned to look at his mother, his eyes widening with realization and guilt. David's face had gone pale, but Sarah wasn't done. She pointed at the destroyed air fryer on the counter. I gave up that vacation. I gave up my dream so that my son could have something he wanted, something that would make him happy. And I did it gladly because that's what parents do. We sacrifice. But this, she gestured at Tyler and Emma, who had finally stopped laughing and were looking uncomfortable. This wasn't an accident. They deliberately destroyed it. They stuffed it with chips and mocked my son and laughed about it. And you, she turned to Jennifer, you stand there and tell me I'm being dramatic? Jennifer's face flushed with anger. They're children, Sarah. They make mistakes. You're acting like they committed a crime. It's just a machine. You can replace machines. Sarah shook her head slowly. You're right. I can replace the machine, but I can't replace my vacation. I can't get back the 3 years of saving. I can't get back the nights I cried in my car after working 16 hours straight because I was exhausted, but I kept going because I had something to work toward. And do you know what the worst part is? It's not even the money. It's the disrespect. It's the fact that your children destroyed something that meant the world to my son, and you think a casual apology is enough. She turned to David, who had been standing silently throughout the entire confrontation. Say something, David. Your children destroyed property worth $250. They did it deliberately. They laughed about it. What are you going to do about it? David opened his mouth, closed it, and then finally said, Sarah, I understand you're upset, but Jennifer is right. They're just kids. They didn't understand the value. We'll talk to them, but I think you're overreacting a bit. That was it. That was the final straw. Sarah felt Michael's hand on her shoulder, and she looked at her son. His eyes were filled with tears, not for the air fryer, but for the sacrifice she had made that he had never known about. Mom, he whispered, we should go. Sarah nodded. She looked around the kitchen one more time, at the destroyed appliance, at her brother who refused to hold his children accountable, at Jennifer who still wore that dismissive expression, at Tyler and Emma who were whispering to each other and giggling again now that the intensity had passed. We're leaving, Sarah said quietly. And I want you to know something. I don't expect you to replace the air fryer. I don't expect an apology, because I know I won't get a sincere one. But I do expect you to understand that there are consequences to raising children who think they can destroy other people's property without remorse. And the consequence for me is that I'm done. I'm done pretending that your family's lack of respect and responsibility is normal. I'm done making excuses for behavior that would never be tolerated in my home. Michael and I are leaving, and we won't be coming back. Jennifer scoffed. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Sarah. You're really going to end family relationships over a kitchen appliance? Sarah picked up the destroyed air fryer, cradling it carefully despite the fact that it was ruined. I'm not ending anything over an appliance, Jennifer. I'm ending it over respect, or the lack of it. There's a difference. As Sarah and Michael walked toward the door, David followed them, trying to smooth things over, saying they should all calm down and talk about this when emotions weren't so high. But Sarah kept walking. She loaded the broken air fryer into her car. Michael got in the passenger seat, and they drove away without looking back. The entire ride home was silent, except for the sound of Michael crying quietly in the seat next to her. When they finally pulled into their apartment parking lot, Michael turned to his mother and said, I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't know. I didn't know you gave up your vacation. Sarah reached over and squeezed her son's hand. It's not your fault, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. But as they walked into their small apartment, Sarah knew that this was far from over. The confrontation had opened something that couldn't be closed, and decisions would have to be made about what came next. The days following the incident were difficult. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with messages from David. At first, they were apologetic. He acknowledged that the kids had been out of line, that maybe they should have been disciplined more harshly, that Jennifer could have been more understanding. But as the days wore on and Sarah didn't respond, the tone of the messages changed. They became defensive, then accusatory. David claimed Sarah was tearing the family apart over nothing, that she was being stubborn and unreasonable, that everyone made mistakes and families were supposed to forgive. Sarah read every message, but responded to none of them. Jennifer never reached out. Neither did Tyler or Emma. That silence spoke volumes. Michael, meanwhile, had taken the incident hard. He blamed himself for bringing the air fryer to his uncle's house, for trusting his cousins. Sarah reassured him repeatedly that he had done nothing wrong, that he couldn't have predicted what would happen. But she could see the hurt in his eyes, the way he had lost something more valuable than an appliance: his trust in family. One evening, about a week after the incident, Michael came to Sarah with a proposition. He had applied for a part-time job at a local grocery store, bagging groceries and stocking shelves. He wanted to earn money to help buy a new air fryer. Sarah's heart broke and swelled with pride at the same time. She tried to tell him it wasn't necessary, that she would figure something out, but Michael was insistent. "You gave up your dream for me, Mom. The least I can do is help fix this." Sarah hugged her son tightly and agreed to let him take the job, but she made him promise to focus on his schoolwork first. As Michael started working his shifts after school, Sarah made a decision of her own. She contacted a lawyer friend who owed her a favor. After explaining the situation, the friend advised her that she had a legitimate case for small claims court. The destruction of property, especially property of significant value, done deliberately by minors under the supervision of their parents, created liability. The friend offered to help her file the paperwork at a reduced rate. Sarah knew that suing her own brother would create an irreparable rift in the family. But she also knew that the rift was already there, created not by her but by years of disrespect, entitlement, and a fundamental difference in values. She filed the claim for the full replacement value of the air fryer plus court costs, and a small amount for emotional distress. When David received the court summons, his reaction was explosive. He called Sarah screaming, accusing her of destroying the family, of being petty and vindictive, of choosing money over blood. Sarah listened calmly and then said, "This isn't about money, David. This is about accountability. Your children destroyed something valuable, and you refused to take responsibility. So now the court will decide who's responsible." The court date arrived 6 weeks later. Sarah and Michael sat on one side of the small courtroom, David and Jennifer on the other. Tyler and Emma were not present, but their actions were detailed in the testimony. Sarah presented photos of the destroyed air fryer, receipts proving its value, and her own testimony about the incident. David's lawyer tried to argue that the children were too young to understand the consequences of their actions, and that Sarah was being vindictive. But the judge, a stern woman in her 60s who had seen countless small claims cases, was not impressed. After hearing both sides, the judge ruled in Sarah's favor. She ordered David and Jennifer to pay the full replacement cost of the air fryer, $249, plus court costs totaling $120, and an additional $150 for emotional distress, citing the deliberate nature of the destruction and the parents' failure to supervise or discipline their children. The total came to $519. As the judge delivered the ruling, she looked directly at David and Jennifer and said something that Sarah would never forget. "Children learn what they live. If you teach them that there are no consequences for their actions, you are failing them as parents. Perhaps this will be a lesson for the whole family. The check arrived 2 weeks later, delivered by certified mail with no note, no apology, just the payment. Sarah deposited it and immediately took Michael shopping. They bought a new air fryer, an even better model than the first one. With the remaining money, Sarah added some of her own savings and booked a weekend trip to the coast. It wasn't the week-long vacation she had originally dreamed of, but it was something. And Michael insisted on coming with her, refusing to let his mother go alone. That weekend at the beach became one of the most precious memories of Sarah's life. She stood in the sand, felt the ocean breeze on her face, and held her son's hand as they watched the sunset over the water. Michael promised her that when he graduated and got a real job, he would take her on a proper vacation, a long one, to anywhere she wanted to go. Sarah smiled and told him that this moment right here was already perfect. As for David and Jennifer, Sarah never spoke to them again. The relationship was severed, and while it caused some awkwardness at extended family gatherings that Sarah simply stopped attending, she found peace in the decision. She had set a boundary, demanded respect, and taught her son the most important lesson of all: that self-worth is not negotiable, and love without respect is not really love at all. Michael thrived in the months that followed. His part-time job taught him responsibility and the value of money. He cooked dinner for his mother several times a week, using the new air fryer, creating meals they shared at their small kitchen table, laughing and talking about their days. The broken air fryer, the one from that terrible night, sat in their apartment for a few weeks before Sarah finally decided what to do with it. She didn't throw it away. Instead, she placed it on a shelf in her bedroom as a reminder that sacrifice is beautiful but should never be taken for granted. A reminder that family is not an excuse for disrespect, and a reminder that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to walk away from people who refuse to treat you with dignity. Years later, when people asked Sarah about the incident, she would smile sadly and say that it was the moment she learned that protecting your peace is not selfish, it's necessary. And Michael, now grown and successful, would always credit that experience as the turning point in his understanding of what it means to be a good person, to recognize the sacrifices others make, to treat people's belongings and feelings with respect, and to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. The story of the $249 air fryer became more than just a tale of destruction and justice. It became a testament to the power of setting boundaries, the importance of teaching accountability, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and son who chose dignity over dysfunction, even when it cost them their family. And in the end, they didn't just replace an appliance. They rebuilt their lives on a foundation of mutual respect and love that no one could ever destroy. This story reminds us that family relationships should be built on respect, not just obligation. Sarah's journey shows us that sometimes the hardest thing to do is also the right thing to do. Setting boundaries, even with family, is not an act of cruelty, but an act of self-preservation and self-respect. The sacrifice of a mother should never be mocked or dismissed, and children must learn accountability, or they will grow into adults who believe they can do whatever they want without consequences. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where family members disrespected your boundaries? Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to distance yourself from toxic family dynamics? What would you have done if you were in Sarah's position? Share your thoughts, your stories, and your opinions in the comments below. We read every single comment, and your perspective matters. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel something, please consider subscribing to our channel. We share real stories about real people facing real challenges, stories that make us reflect on our own lives and relationships. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. And before you go, take a moment to watch the next recommended video. we have another powerful story waiting for you, one that we think you'll find just as compelling. Thank you for watching, and remember, your dignity is never too high a price to pay for family harmony. Sometimes, walking away is the bravest thing you can do.